Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. So in the next 30 minutes, SureCloud will give a high-level demonstration of our compliance management GRC solution. Before we dive into the session, just want to give everyone a quick intro of who we are today. So my name's Yang. I'm the head of customer success and pre-sales based in London. And joined with me today is my colleague Christian, who is a GRC SME in the pre-sales function, joining from the US. What I'll do now is we have set a poll question, which I'm going to launch, and I'll come back to the outcome at the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. So in the next few seconds, you'll see that there's going to be a poll question available for you to answer. So now, who we are. So SureCloud was founded in 2006. As of today, we have about just over 500 customers in Europe, US, and the Asia Pacific. So every region is highlighted in red in the world map on the right. And then physical location-wise, we are based in the UK and US. So we have one office in the US, and in the UK, our leadership office is in London, and our implementation team sits in our Reading office. So today will be a GRC demo, but other than our GRC solutions or GRC practice, we also have a cybersecurity practice as well as a risk advisory arm. And all of our products and services are based on the cloud as a SaaS solution. So in our GRC space, we have 6 out-of-the-box solutions. That is not to say we can't build any bespoke risk and compliance-related solution for our customer, but for these 6 use cases, we have off-the-shelf available products based on best practice as well as containing dummy data. So if any customer wants to just quickly go live so that they have a tool to help them manage these areas, they can do so. So last Tuesday, we've had a high-level view at third-party risk management solution. Today, we'll focus on the compliance management piece on the top right. So what is the value of SureCloud's compliance management solution? Well, one, obviously we need a tool in place to move away from spreadsheets, duplicate of data, difficulty to maintain the data quality as such. But by having a compliance solution in a wider GRC or risk management integrated risk management landscape, what it allows us to is to have the ability to harmonize our control content, understand what regulations are in place, understand what policies are in place, so we can harmonize a unique set of controls that addresses all areas of compliance within the organization. And from there, then we can also manage the end-to-end life cycle of the controls, because our platform and our solution allows process management and process embedding as well as workflow embedding. So we can manage the entire life cycle of a control from this beginning stage of why this business needed control. How do we then determine where the control is mitigating, what risk are we dealing with, to then also conducting various assessments against control to the end of the control where we decide actually this area of risk or this area of mitigation is no longer required or superseded. We can then decommission the control. So in terms of conducting assessment, we can do the usual design adequacy testing, operational effectiveness testing, as well as the control self-assessment approach. Because all of this is embedded into a single solution, is harmonized in a way, then we can allow us to do intel reporting based on data aggregation or slicing, cutting, or filtering the data to give meaningful reports and dashboards that allows not only the first line to know what exercise they have or what activities they have to complete, but also our managers and leadership to understand what it means from a management perspective or from a decision-making perspective from the space of compliance. So before I hand it over to my colleague Christian to show us the system, just want to cover one of our main selling points, which is our compliance solution is actually integrated with a third-party intellectual property called Secure Control Framework, or SCF. So the SCF is basically a library of unique controls designed to target against 150 plus regulations, primarily in the cyber, infosec, and IT space. By having this integration in place and being offered as part of our standard offering is that when we set up a compliance environment for our customer, we can as simply as just pick a control framework related and then decide on what regulations the control framework is trying to mitigate or trying to comply with. And then moreover, we're able then to import that whole library of controls and also operationalize them or localize them against specific business areas, processes, or in the example of this slide, different regions, because they may be different regulatory requirements, or different regions are using different underlying infrastructure or technology. And once we deploy these controls, then the different regions can then test them locally. What that allows us to do is to understand how compliant we are in our compliance landscape in the specific regions. But moreover, because they came from the parent unique control library, we can aggregate them upward to understand as an organization, how compliant am I at this point in time? Because with the SCF integration, as well as how our environment is set up, we also map the controls to different regulations. So then we can also look at from the other spectrum of how compliant we are against different regulations or maybe different internal policies business may have. So that's the value of having a harmonized control framework. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but what essentially the slide is telling you is that we have a lot of out-of-box integrations already available, but we also have a integration hub where the team is sat in our Reading office who can build any bespoke APIs if needed for our system to talk with any of your existing solutions or interfaces, as long as that software is allows open API and isn't set behind a firewall. So at this point, I'll hand over to my colleague Christian to cover 4 areas within our compliance solution. While we're in that demo, we're very happy to have you raise any questions you may have around compliance, and we'll address them together after we go through the poll question in the last 5 to 10 minutes of this session. So the 4 areas we want to cover today in terms of demonstration is how do we leverage a solution to access compliance on a page, and also using a integrated risk management solution, how do we manage our control library in an effective way? And then from there, we can also look at the concept of how do I test one control to satisfy multiple regulatory requirements or multiple internal policy-based requirements. And then lastly, what we want to demonstrate today is now everything we've discussed so far, now we have a harmonized control framework that sits across our organization. But what if there are very specific compliance requirements that we need to meet because, we want to be certified against certain standards, or that, we need to maintain certain licenses, and just using a harmonized way of design testing or operating testing is not enough. How do we address that within a larger framework? At this point, I'll hand over to my colleague, Christian.
All right, thank you, Yang. So let me go ahead and get my screen shared here, and we'll jump into the demonstration. Right. So you should be able to see my screen now. Currently, what we're looking at is the SureCloud solution. More specifically, we're looking at our dashboarding and reporting capabilities for the compliance solution. So at the top of the screen, standardized across all of our different areas, we like to go ahead and provide an intro and guidance section. Essentially, this is just some high-level information on what the dashboard entails, how to utilize it. Maybe we'll provide an email to reach out to if they need any assistance or have any questions. To the right of that, we're going to have a quick access area, which is going to be for favoriting different areas that are more relevant to this specific dashboard. So in this case, maybe I want to deploy a specific control or jump to our indicators or test plans, whatever the scenario may be. We can very easily go ahead and favorite those areas for navigation. More specifically, looking at the data we are reporting on and getting that holistic view of compliance on a page, we'll be able to see that we can favorite or set key controls so we can identify which controls are more significant, and we can work on those more specifically. To the right of that, we can get a holistic view of our total compliance for the controls we've deployed into the system and how well implemented those are. And then to the right of that, we could also go ahead and group our controls by the maturity as well as the business area. So in this case, we have finance, HR, InfoSec, marketing, product. So we can group on those as well as see how mature each of those are. It's also important to note that I can jump into any of these and see exactly what areas are performing well. So I can see for finance, we have some that are quantitatively controlled versus well-defined, as well as some that are not performed. And once we go to control library, we can go ahead and review those tests and see exactly which of those areas need more attention. Just going further down the page, we have the compliance by domain. It's very similar to that before we were just looking at. We can go ahead and group by specific domain and also measure how well implemented those are. Going further down the page, we can also get a holistic view of the compliance maturity within a pie chart. So we have a lot of different reporting types that we can utilize versus just bar charts. We can also do grids, as you can see below. To the right of that, we have our compliance by regulation. So as Yang had mentioned, we have an integration with the secure controls framework. So there's many different regulations and standards we can measure our controls against and deploy into the system. And that's exactly what this report is showcasing. So based on those controls that we've deployed into our control library and the control tests that are associated with those, we can go ahead and measure how well implemented those controls are. And based off those related regulations, what we're going to see here is ideally a full green bar, right? So that would indicate to us that those controls are implemented and we're compliant with that regulation. Otherwise, if you see any red or gray in this case, that means that maybe there's some controls that are not implemented well enough, or we're still waiting on a result for those related controls. Lastly, we have two grids here, so we can look at the controls within the master control library, easily navigate to those. We can sort by any of those attributes, as well as search by any of those attributes to easily navigate to them. And then to the right of that, we have our operational controls. So as Yang had I was speaking about earlier, we can go ahead and operationalize controls within different areas. So maybe it's locations, business units. We can very easily go ahead and test at that child level as well. The last thing to highlight here is the ability to go ahead and get data out of the system. So functionally, what we're able to do, we can copy a report. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and grab this maturity by business area report. I can very easily do so, copy that image and use that in an email, maybe a PowerPoint, whatever the scenario may be. I can also go ahead and download into 3 different file formats. So we have CSV, Excel, and PDF. And then we do have the capability to go ahead and generate a managed resource link. And what that's going to allow us to do is generate a link and use that into any other reporting platform, such as Power BI or Tableau. And that'll give us access to the data within SureCloud live within those tools. The last thing to highlight here is the scheduled export capability, which is a very nice functionality to have. So let's say you have a meeting at the beginning of every month. What you can do is go ahead and click on the email dashboard, and we can set that recipient list. We can set the frequency, so daily, weekly, monthly. So if I say monthly here, I can then go ahead and set the day, and then even the specific time that I want that to be sent at, that email to be sent out at. The next area I'm going to jump into is the control library, where we're going to go ahead and manage all of our controls from a centralized area. So it's always important to highlight, as we're going about this demonstration, this is typically a control or compliance manager administrative view, right? Otherwise, you can navigate controls through dashboarding, reporting, notifications. So there's plenty of ways to navigate to specific areas as actions come about. But more specifically, how you'd go about managing the control library effectively is through this view here. So we can very easily go ahead and see that we have the name, ID, the framework it came from, whether or not there's updates available, which is a really nice feature to have. So how that works is as the SCF makes content updates, it'll push those out, go ahead and notify you, and you can review those actions. Same can be said with any internal control frameworks. So if you were to go ahead and make updates and import those into the solution, it'll go ahead and let you know that you have updates available as well, and you can review the version changes as well. So if I click into this, we'll be able to see exactly what those changes are. So we'll have all the versions at the top, and then it'll go ahead and highlight any changes that have been made, right? So we can see that there's a few regulations that were removed, some were added, and then if we agree with all the changes made, we can go ahead and push out those changes as well by clicking the update button. Looking at some of the other attributes at this level, you can see, of course, we have the description, whether or not it's been operationalized, the domain, any related regulations or citations. So all this information is also tracked within the control details as well, but it does pull it up to this top level so we can easily digest the information. So as far as adding controls, let's say you want to go about adding your own specific custom control one-off, you can do that by clicking Add Control. Maybe you want to do a bulk import, go ahead and choose Import Controls, define the framework and high-level information there, and then we can also provide you with a sample template to go ahead and base that import off of, so you can easily import it into the control library. Lastly, that SCF integration. So if I click on Update here, that'll allow me to very easily go ahead and choose the specific framework, regulation, domain, and controls. So we can be very granular about our selection when deploying into the control library. So we have the SCF framework. What that's going to do is narrow down our regulation selection, right? So we'll see that we have quite a few different standards and regulations here that the SCF covers. So what we'll do, we'll choose all of those regulations that are in scope. That's going to go ahead and dynamically filter down the domains based off the previous selection. And then same can be said with those controls, right? So we can go all the way down to that control level. Once we have our selection, we'll click Apply, and that'll deploy those into our control library, and we'll have that content available to us. So now if I jump into a specific example of control, we'll be able to look at the control details, as well as how to go about testing the controls. So we'll have a very simple workflow out of the box. Of course, we can assign the control. If it goes into a review state, that'll highlight as well. Otherwise, if those have already gone through those workflow stages, it'll be an active state. Below that, we'll have the ID as well as the name for that control. It'll notify us of the status or if any changes have been made as well. Below that, we have the details. So we're going to be looking at the status, whether or not we've operationalized this control. It'll give us some information around which framework it's from and whether or not we flagged it as a key control. And then, of course, we're going to track the ID, name, and ownership as well. So we can break that up into a few different roles. So we have our assessors, our owners, and then our reviewers. Of course, we're also going to be able to provide that control description and group on a few different areas. So maybe we want to categorize it by type. So is it a corrective control, detective control, or preventative control? We can also do the same within this function as well. And it's important to note that a lot of this content, especially if you're utilizing the SCF integration, will be pre-populated for you, but you can change it as needed as well. Going down a little further, we have some status information, but then we also go ahead and pose each of our controls within a question format and assign a weight to that. What that's allowing us to do is providing us the capability to go ahead and use our internal assessment management application. So we can go ahead and assess specific areas of the organization and measure their compliance and easily go ahead and reference this control question within those assessments. Below that, we have a table view of all of the associated mappings for regulations this control is related to, as well as the citations and domains as well. And then we get into our control maturity section. So what we can do here is set our target maturity as well as where our current maturity is at this time. And for each of these ratings, we can go ahead and define those maturity descriptions as well. You can see that based off our assigned target maturity and our current maturity, it's going to highlight those as well. Going a little further down, we have our testing. So as Yang mentioned previously, we have three different tests that we provide out of the box. We have a design test, an operating test, as well as a simple control self-assessment. And we can go ahead and define the testing procedures for each of those. Below each of those testing procedures, you'll see that we have a table where we can go ahead and kick off those control tests. So to kick off a control test, you can do it very easily by choosing the type of test you'd like to perform and then clicking on Create Test. Otherwise, if you'd like to automate that, you can certainly do that as well. So maybe it's at a specific cadence, we'd go ahead and create that in this table for you and notify the specific individuals assigned, such as the assessor and reviewer. And then, of course, as the test gets submitted, the reviewer will be notified. So jumping into an example of a control test here. We'll have a very simple workflow at the top. So the test is first going to be assigned. It'll then go into an in-progress state once the assigned individual begins working on the control test. Otherwise, once it's been complete, it'll go into a review state before being completed. At the top here, you'll be able to see the name for the control test, as well as a flag indicating that it is a key control. And then below that, we'll have the details section. This information is all going to be pre-populated for you, so you can easily just look up and reference this while performing the control test. Otherwise, you have the actual assessment. So it's going to go ahead and ask the control owner, can you please go ahead and review the control, make sure it's implemented operating correctly. So it's going to reference that testing procedure that we had defined previously. If it is, we can go ahead and say yes or no, define that maturity based on the control test, and then provide any supporting evidence for that control test. Off the back end of that test, if there was any actions or exceptions that were raised or you identified, you can go ahead and raise them very easily within the remediation section using our centralized actions and exceptions solution. So we can assign a facilitator, define the action, set the due date, and of course, that's going to go ahead and notify the facilitator for that action accordingly. Same can be said with the exceptions. So maybe the COVID lockdown is gone ahead and postpone things for the next 6 months. We can raise that, set the duration for that exception, and then we'll be notified and made aware as we're approaching that date. Lastly, we have our approval section. So we can go ahead and decide, provide a decision there, as well as any justification around that decision before closing out the control test. Going further down, we have the operational control section. So as we go ahead and look at the example here, you can see that we've deployed this to different business units. So looking at that parent-child relationship, we have our master control level. And then if we wanted to go ahead and test at a more granular level, in this case, these business units, we could very easily do so. And then we have our internal assessment results and any linked policies. So these are referencing any assessments that are utilizing this control or posing as a control question in those assessments. And same can be said with the policies. So we can go ahead and relate any of our controls to any of the documents that we're tracking within the solution as well. With that being said, I'll go ahead and jump into the internal assessment solution. So in this example, we're going to be looking at a NIST CSF example. So maybe we want to go ahead and measure the compliance of the NIST CSF regulation. We can go ahead and choose those questions from our questionnaire library and send them out to the recipients. At the top here, we'll have a summary of the information, as well as some risk and maturity information that is going to be only visible to the reviewers. More importantly, though, we have the question categories. So you can break it up into multiple different sections, or you can keep it simple, like in this case, and just have it categorized into a singular section or category. If I jump into this, we'll be presented with those questions. So we'll have some high-level details at the top, going through, the assessment type, some data information, status, descriptions, things of that nature. But below that, we're going to have the actual questions. So we can choose each of those questions from the control library that are relevant, provide the responses as the recipient of this assessment, as well as provide any comments or questions if they come about. If you are not compliant, or if you choose no for that control question, it's going to go ahead and allow you to see that it's not performed. Otherwise, if you are, you're going to be asked to go ahead and provide a maturity rating for that control. And then you can also go ahead and provide evidence as needed for each of these control questions. Once this is submitted, the reviewer is going to be notified to come in and provide that review of the assessment and then raise any remedial actions. Now they can raise their own custom actions, or within the questionnaire library, we can define specific responses to each of these. So if it's not performed, then we'll know that these actions need to take place. Lastly, we have the risk response area. So we can go ahead and calculate the amount of risk that is associated with each of these responses and then roll that up into an overall score. Navigating back to the main page, looking at some of the information that gets pulled up and summarized at this level, we'll be able to see exactly which controls were failed as they were related to those questions within the assessment, the associated risk score, and any justifications or comments that were provided. And then below that, we also can go ahead and raise any actions, right? So if we've identified that some of the controls were not being performed, we can raise those actions, or maybe even flag them as exceptions for a specific duration and return that to the recipient before closing it out. And that is a good summary of our compliance solution. So that concludes it. So I'll go ahead and I will turn it back over to Yang, and we can take a look at the polling questions.
Thank you, Christian. I will share my screen now. So yes, so I'm going to end the poll now. I think the majority of people have already answered. So looking at the poll, it seems like no one's answered option 5, or no one chose option 5, where the business in a state of testing one control to satisfy many regulations. I think the rest are evenly spread. So based on our experience in the compliance space, The most effective way of managing compliance activities through controls would be that we would understand how a single control can map and satisfy multiple regulations, because that helps us to avoid duplicative work. If we do not have that visibility, what may happen is in different business areas or in different regions, we may have a similar control already in place, but it's being tested by two different individuals for the same purposes. So that can reduce the effectiveness of how we work as a compliance function in the business. And then I'm just looking at the chat. I think so far I've got 2 questions. Sorry, I should move on with my slide. So I've got 2 questions so far. One is from Jody. Is how often should we plan self-assessment testing? Is it just extra cost resource if we do it too much? So I think for organizations from a compliance landscape, if we start from scratch, right, a good starting point would probably be define a fixed frequency, let's say every quarter or every 6 months, depending on what our resourcing restraints are, as well as how many manpowers we have. But as we mature in a mature organization where we understand what risk we're mitigating, the importance of those risks, as well as what we're trying to be complying with, it probably makes more sense for control self-assessment frequencies or even operating effective frequencies to be tested based on the importance of that control, or what that control is trying to mitigate. So for key controls, let's say if it's UK SOX related, or it's to be compliant with certain financial regulators, or to be compliant with any ISO certifications we may have, those may be tested more frequent. And for the ones that's more day-to-day, or maybe they're already automated control, we're just doing a sample testing now and then to capture the evidence, we may reduce that self-assessment frequency to be maybe 6 months or 9 months instead, to free up some resourcing capabilities, resourcing capacities. Next question is from Jenny. Hi, Christian. Is the concept of control maturity going to be replacing control effectiveness rating? So yes and no. So if we look at the SCF framework, or if we look at some of the updated approaches to compliance, there are ideas of using multiple tiered maturity rating as an alternative, because those rating definition will give you more details of how things are designed or how things are operating. However, organization has established compliance way before these things came out, and more typical than not, there are also internal things to look at when we're assessing a control. So what I think the safest answer would be, if you have a way of pulling in control maturity tiers through integration, or because you have the data readily available, have it as reference data. But to make sure you cover all aspects of your business, keep the same original questions you may have around control testing, and making sure you satisfy that using the more conventional way of saying whether the control is effective or not. If there are no more questions, I'll just move on to the final slide. So yes, so we're just about.
I think one more question came in, Yang.
Oh.
So it looks like, could you explain how the internal controls are linked to the external SCF regulations? So I can answer that first part, and I know there's a second part to that. So they go ahead and we provide you with specific attributes or fields that you can go ahead and map them to. So if you were to go ahead and import your controls from a spreadsheet, right, we're going to provide you with a column to go ahead and put those regulations that they are associated with, right? So it will be mapped in the system. And then as far as the second part of that, so how is it arranged so that the chart can tell which degree one adheres to a specific regulation? That's going to be based on, of course, those relationships that we just put in place, as well as the most recent control tests. So we can measure how effective those controls are.
Yeah. And the second part is, how is this arranged so that the chart can tell which degree one adheres to specific regulation? So because the whole SCF framework has looked at the control and created a unique one. So in the different maturity levels, it would have addressed that already. So it knows that being in different tiers, it satisfies the specific requirements of different regulations. So if regulation needs to be on the 5th tier, then below that, you're not going to be compliant with those tiers. And the last question is around data storage. Yes, so we are hosted on the cloud via AWS, and for our majority of our customers in Europe, it's going to be hosted in the UK. I'm just conscious of time. The final slide is just our details if you want to reach out to us, and also some of the webinars that SureCloud is hosting in the upcoming few weeks within February. Well, thank you so much for your time and wish you a lovely afternoon.